and welcome to Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the stories that make our community tick. Today we're going to be visited by someone who's been making our community tick longer than, I'd say, at least half the city has been alive, and about to make a major move in his life and a major move in our community. Will Ginsberg, until the end of next week, the CEO of the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven. Will is ending a great 24-year run as the CEO. He's passing the torch to Karen Du Bois Walton to lead New Haven's biggest philanthropy community funder into the next generation. Will, welcome to Dateline, and thanks for coming back.
Thank you, Paul. It's lovely to see you, as always.
And it's always fun to have you here and talk to you. 24 years. What a good run. How many people can you look around town and say, they've been running an organization for 24 years well?
Well, it's a privilege. And 40 years in New Haven, actually. It's almost exactly 40 years to the day since Ben DeLito hired me as development administrator. And I did come back to New Haven from Washington in the fall of 2000 to the Community Foundation. And it's hard to believe it, but the fall of 2000 is 24 years ago. Where did the time go?
It didn't. Yeah. So, Will Ginsberg, how's it feel to be leaving this job that you've been dominating your life? You've been working intensely every day for 24 years. What's it like now to retire, and why are you retiring?
Well, I will say I feel good. I think the foundation is in a strong place, making important contributions to this community. I think Karen Du Bois Walton is a great successor, so I have great confidence there. And I feel like, for myself personally, retirement is really a personal decision more than anything else. I feel like this is the right time. I'm about to turn 70. I have lots of interests, lots of things I'm looking forward to exploring. For adorable grandchildren, 2 in New Haven and 2 in Westport. So how lucky we are that they're all here in Connecticut. So, I feel like, is there ever a good time to give up something you love to do? Maybe not, but this feels like, from the foundation standpoint and from my own standpoint, it feels like the right time.
It's good to know when to go.
Yes,
pass the torch. Look at Ben DeLito, the mayor you worked for, and
right.
John DeStefano. They knew when to go, and up rather than down.
Right, and
times change. You need new leadership.
And how much time do we have? Any of us? We never know. So
I'm interested, Will, in the issue of how community institutions fare when leadership changes. When a longtime leader who becomes personified in the community as the representative of that organization passes the torch and has done well. Lately, I've seen, maybe tell me if you agree with this because you watch the community closely, I've seen a lot of passing the torch in a way I consider effective that says good things about our community. I'm looking at Fairhaven Health. Katrina Clark ran it forever. It was time, she did a great job, she found it, but it was time for someone else to lead it, and there's someone come in very well for that. Hill Health Center, right. Cornell Scott left. Desk, I think, is actually the best example because that, is a great organization down at Evening Soup Kitchen. Found a new young person, I think in his 30s, maybe early 40s, who's just built that place up, having to do more than ever and taking a leading role in how the city deals with the unhoused. The Art Space, Arts Council, City Hall had a transition that was generational, a really important generational change 5 years ago. The Housing Authority now is going to have one because the Housing Authority director has become senior. What should a person think about? What's the news to think about when someone who's at the helm a long time is move on? How do you get them to move on? Or how do they decide the right time? And how do you make sure it's a transition that helps the organization grow in what came before?
Well, I think that's a really good point. I think the examples you point to, Paul, I agree with.
Oh, and the Independent, New Haven Independent, after 18 years, got a new editor. And
right. Did
a great job.
But I think in each of those cases, and this may go to the heart of your question. In each of those cases, the organization, entering into a transition, the organization was in a strong place. The organization had strong leadership, and it was in a strong place. There are, of course, examples of transitions that happen for other reasons.
See, I kind of think those are the norm. That's why I've been interested lately that it's been sort of a positive. Not that everything's perfect. Like often it is time, like at the Independent, to have someone who's younger, someone who has a different set of skills as the world changes. But I've been just so impressed that these important institutions stayed strong and came in a new direction with new energy.
Yes, I think that's right. But I do think that transitions, part of what's been in my head, and I think it would be true for some of those other people you mentioned, I know many of them, was to leave an organization that you care about, you devoted yourself to, when it is in a strong position, because you're in a much better place, A, to recruit a strong new leader if the organization's in a good place, and B, to have that leader, because transitions are, by their nature can be a little bumpy to have.
You've hired the people used to work in a certain way.
So I think that.
And what do you have to do in community foundation for that? Like, people are used to a pattern, a rhythm, what it's like in the office when you have certain meetings, how decisions get made. I'm sure there'll be new people coming in gradually that represent the vision of the new leader. How do you make sure that transition works?
Well, I think ultimately, of course, it's up to my successor, not me. But I think that you prepare.
You could throw a monkey wrench, or you can help.
Well, and you prepare your team. And one of my messages to both our team internally, our staff, but also and to the board, but also to the community is. Things will change. Things should change. Things need to change. For the Community Foundation to be an effective organization, we need to change with our community. So,
how?
I don't want anyone to feel like the Community Foundation, like it's working. So let's leave it alone. We have to go in. The staff, the board, and the community, our donors, the nonprofits, all have to take the view that change is good. I think where we've been most effective is when we've changed to meet the changes that are happening in the community.
Let's talk about some of that. Well, we're talking about Ginsberg, the CEO of the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven, for another week and 3 days. And after a 24-year run on Dateline New Haven on WNHH-FM, how big is the Community Foundation? What are your assets and how many recipients and donors?
Well, at the end of 23, our assets were just under $750 million. In 23, we brought in over $40 million in a variety of different ways and made about $33 million in grants from.
So you're always building for the future.
Absolutely. It's an endowment institution, and we're building for the long-term future.
How many recipients do you have?
Several thousand recipients. Hundreds of grant recipients through our normal processes, plus, with all our donor advised funds and other funds, the number's much bigger.
Basically everything that's a community cause, whether it's small green spaces outside libraries and intersections, to street outreach worker program, to soup kitchens, right, and to arts organizations, to social change organizations, to economic development, to education promise for New Haven.
Right, all of the above. And not only in New Haven, but we are the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven. That means 20 towns. As far west as Milford, and as far east as Madison, and as far north as Wallingford.
How about west?
West, Milford in the west, and then the lower Naugatuck Valley as well. 5 towns in the valley where
your subsidiary,
where we have an affiliate,
but no Waterbury, which is often considered in Greater New Haven.
Yes, Waterbury has its own community foundation. Waterbury is part of New Haven County, but Waterbury has its own community foundation, which actually was the first community foundation in Connecticut.
Really?
Waterbury was the first, Hartford was the second, and New Haven was the third. All in the 1920s, in that first generation of community foundation.
So, Will, when you came back to New Haven after working in Washington in 2000 to take over the community foundation, what was your vision of where you wanted to take it?
Well, I think my vision starts with community. It starts with the idea that, and it always has, and this goes back to my earliest days in New Haven. It always has been about. Been anchored in the view that that when people come together and focus locally and engage locally and give locally, that's how we move the community forward. And in the world we live in, there are lots of other things that one can engage in and give to. This is a world of instantaneous, everywhere communication. So how do we get the people of our community and the people who care about this community and the people who have roots in this community to care about this community and to focus on this community? That's been, and so my vision was and still is to find ways to do that. And it isn't just about bringing money into the foundation and putting money out from the foundation. The foundation's done extremely well, where our assets are 3.5 times what they were when I came, almost 4 times. But that's not even the point, because what our community really needs is local people to be engaged locally and to give locally. And if that happens, the community will be successful and has been successful. And if it doesn't happen, well, we've seen there are a lot of communities. You don't have to go very far to see communities where that's not happening and where the community suffers as a result.
I remember sitting in your office when you came back in 2020. You had been in New Haven since the mid-'80s. You were development administrator. You were president of Science Park. You went to Washington to serve as chief of staff to Commerce Secretary Ron Brown. You ran Fannie Mae, I believe, if I'm not wrong.
Right. Well,
ran was you at
Federal Housing Finance Board.
Yeah. So you were back, and you came back to New Haven after that time in D.C., and you really felt like you were home. What struck me more than anything, all I remember of that conversation, is how happy you were to be in New Haven, because you had worked with so many people in your other two jobs who just do things in town, neighborhood people, small business people, developers, community activists, and you loved it. And you really loved the people here, and you were so excited to do it. And, when you talk now about your vision, what struck me, there was no specific issue in there. It was a process. So when I watched you run this foundation, I saw you get involved when you saw the community going in a direction. So when we were very worried about violence. You wanted to do a model street outreach worker program. You were at the table with the money, with the people crafting it. Not you, I mean your organization you built.
Right.
When there was a lot of concern about the state of public education, there still is. I know you were concerned with some charter schools, but more importantly, with the Promise New Haven, you put the real work up with Yale to and working with community people to have a program to get any kid doing well in post school to be able to afford to go to college. And you picked a fantastic director.
Yes, indeed.
Who has been there now for years and I believe has become one of the key community leaders. And then after George Floyd in 2020 and in the pandemic, you went right to the front in terms of getting a lot of money out to people so that we didn't have lots of people going hungry and losing their homes. You were part of that. And also racial justice and reckoning. It was such a white organization. You gradually brought in a lot of people of color on the staff, on the board. So the board became person of color led for a long time, Black and Hispanic.
Still is.
And you have an African American woman who's very respected and reviewed coming in. Did I accurately sort of summarize how your vision of bringing the community forward took form with specific issues while you were there?
Yes, you absolutely did. Better than I have, actually. And I think that's right. And I'll add one more to the list, which is, starting before the pandemic, just the sense, and this played to my own background in economic development, but just the sense that looking long term, the community, our community, which was, and Connecticut, which was for such a long time slow growing and exporting our most talented young people, that we needed to grow, and that we would never be able to address the social challenges that exist in this community, that the Community Foundation is all about, without growth. And the growth needs to be inclusive. And we're now at a time when our community is growing, and where we have an economic engine in the biotech and technology spheres coming out of Yale. So how do we make that benefit all the people of this community? So we've leaned in on that issue too, as just another example of what you were just saying.
Would you say that that's a big piece of unfinished business that maybe your successor is well positioned to build on?
I do think it's certainly a piece of unfinished business, and Karen is extremely well positioned to build on that and a lot of other things we do. I mean, I think that, part of our strategies around that were with our own grant making and the money we've raised, state money, federal money, city money, private money, to support entrepreneurs of color and women entrepreneurs and technologists. But part of our strategy was also to get the other institutions to step forward and to see inclusive, to bring the business sector and the social sector together, to have businesses in this community recognize that the viability of the community depends on success in meeting our social challenges, and have the social sector recognize that we need to grow in order for that to happen. And I still think that is an unfinished agenda. I'm leaving at a time when I don't think our community has really fully embraced this idea of inclusive growth. At least not the way I hope that it will.
And how do you hope they'll embrace it specifically?
Well, I think it's got to come from business leadership. I think it's got to come from, Mayor Elliker has embraced it, and he and Yale have created a Center for Inclusive Growth. I think that Center for Inclusive...
But that has no money. That's not real.
Well, Yale put $1 million a year on the table.
What does that do?
But I agree. That's the starting point.
That reimburses the expenses for administrative overhead that they would have charged to some other account. I know it's cynical, but I remember the Center for the City in the Yale deal that was similar in 1990 when they said, we're doing a lot for the city. We're giving $50,000 to start a center for the city that will get grants and think the big issues. The 50 went immediately to a summer program, which was fine for youth for 1 year. There was never any Center for Growth. I'm sorry to be so skeptical. I love all the things happening in New Haven. That seemed to me like the biggest fake part of that deal is a way to give Yellow Street for 100 years, and I'm fine with them having that street for 100 years.
And frankly, it's been 3 years since that was announced, and you would have to ask others on the staff and on the board what's coming out of that. But my point
I heard
is,
them talk about it. I didn't hear any concrete idea. I got no confidence, and that's okay. We have a lot of other people thinking about stuff, including the Community Foundation.
Right,
you know.
right.
I don't know. I'm sorry. That
No,
was
no,
aside.
no.
I thought that was bogus.
I think you're illustrating my point, which is we have not yet, as a community, embraced this idea. And I also think, when we tackle a challenge in New Haven, be it the ones you mentioned, be it education, be it inclusive growth, whatever it might be, who's at the table? City Hall is at the table, the Community Foundation is at the table, Yale's at the table, Yale New Haven Health is at the table, all of which is great. I think we need business leadership. When I came to New Haven 40 years ago, Paul, and you and I, remember these days, the civic leadership in New Haven was banks and utilities and law firms and still a couple of manufacturing companies. It was the for-profit sector. Now that
Heads
world,
and meds now.
That world is long since gone. I'm not pining to get it back, but we do have strong businesses in this community, and we do have, as I said before, an economic engine that can drive growth and can address the social challenges through growth in the biotech,
Companies that people have
biopharma.
never even heard of, like Arvinus.
Yeah, exactly. And they're early stage.
Alexion.
But they are the future. They are the present, and they are the future. Now, it's different than the old days. They don't do all their business locally. These are global companies. So we need to find a new formula for that. But if those businesses aren't engaging, to my earlier point about what makes a community successful, if those businesses aren't joining with City Hall and joining with the eds and meds and joining with the philanthropies and joining with the donors and the people who care to make the community successful, then the future doesn't look as bright
And
as
it's
if they
interesting to
are.
think about the Community Foundation's role. Sometimes you hire people from outside of a community. I listed earlier in the show agencies that, for the most part, hired from inside the community. You already knew the people. So you already had relationships at every part of civic society. And so does your successor, Karen Du Bois Walton.
Right.
It seems that helps in the idea that you're not just giving money as the Community Foundation, but you're convening and trying to have your money matched. And I should just note for the record, the Community Foundation does give money to the Independent. It was an original funder and stalwart supporter of the Online Journalism Project, the nonprofit, and that Will Ginsberg saw the need for community nonprofit journalism to replace the disappearing for-profit media role and became an apostle sent all over the country to convince other Community Foundation leaders that supporting local nonprofit journalism was worth it for their communities, and it's happened to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars.
Well,
So,
and let me say a
as
word
I
about
said,
that, Paul. You're very gracious. And of course, the Knight Foundation, as you know, in Miami, took the lead on that in bringing community foundations and
bringing you, and then
we-
you were the person. They called me, a vice president, and said, this thing's happening. Hedge funds are buying the papers. They're gone. Do you know anywhere in America where there's like community foundation person who might be able to tell them? I said, New Haven, the guy already's on it. And they brought you down to Miami and other cities, and people listened. I met the people who listened.
Well, there is some truth to that. I also want to say that that journalism, is an essential part of functioning society and a democratic society. I also want to say, I've always seen journalism, the local newspaper, whether it is the Register and Journal Courier of an earlier day or the Independent today. You and I have had this conversation many times over many years, as essential to this idea of community. For people in a place to have a common base of knowledge about what's going on, who's doing what, who won the game, who died and his obituaries in the paper today, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All the things that the Independent does, all the things that newspapers have always done, that's an essential part of what connects people to one another. And community is fundamentally about connection. That's what community is. It's not just people living in the same place. It's people being connected to one another. So, that's what you do here at the Independent every day. And that's why, from the Community Foundation's perspective, my perspective, this is one of the things I'm proudest of, because
That's great.
because the funding the things that keep us together as a community, not just that provide services. That's mainly what we do. Providing services, yes, but keep us together as a community, connect us as a community. That's at the heart of what the Community Foundation is.
Did anything surprise you that didn't work out the way you thought? Were you hoping to do something that you weren't able to do?
Well, I will. I'm withholding. I'm reserving judgment on where this inclusive growth work goes. I think the work that we've done, I'm very proud of. Extremely proud of, but whether the community as a whole embraces these ideas, I think the
It's hard.
it's hard. I think
The intentions aren't hard. The carrying it out is hard. Training the people so they can have the jobs, so they can play a real role in it. They can help direct how we build our city, how we have the benefits of that growth filter into education and neighborhood development.
right, and it goes to so many other issues beside jobs. But I agree with that. I think that I'm proud of the way we've supported the arts, larger arts institutions, smaller community arts institutions, as a tool for bringing the community together. I think there's always more to do there. This is a community that has a wonderful arts community. I remember it's now almost a decade ago, we did a program on, I forget if the Independent covered it, we did a program on gun violence in partnership with Long Wharf Theater. This was during Long Wharf's 50th. It was a fantastic thing. I still remember that because it brought together that afternoon and evening at Long Wharf for the program and then the play. The play was called Brownsville Song, which was about gun violence in Brooklyn. It could have been just as well been called Newhallville Song, about gun violence in New Haven. But I remember that was one of the most diverse, integrated rooms, socioeconomic and racial integration that I've ever been in New Haven. And, I think that's a model for what the foundation and others can do to bring people together in this community, too.
We're talking to Will Ginsberg. He's the CEO of the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven. He's passing the reins after 24 years at the helm to Karen Du Bois Walton. Will, you and I had a conversation recently that's really been playing over in my head. I found it so interesting. You were talking about looking back at your career and all the roles you've played, starting in the middle 80s as development administrator in the city when we tried our first time to rebuild New Haven for the new century. We got a little bit there. It's a boom now. That was the precursor. Then you ran Science Park, which was the idea of how do we start using Yale's research and other tech startups to build a new economy. And you really was in that first phase when people tried to start making take it seriously. Now it's really taken off as well. You went to the Commerce Department, you came back here, and you talked about neoliberalism, which is a word that gets thrown around a lot. And you were talking about how you felt that all those roles, the work was guided by a belief in neoliberalism that you've reconsidered. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. The term I used was neoliberalism is the term people refer to today. The term I used then was public-private partnership. But, when I graduated from law school in 1980, I'd grown up in New York. I had come of age in the 70s in New York, and the same thing was true.
I remember that too.
And the same thing was true in New Haven. The 70s were the bottom for these cities.
The hangover.
And the cities were dying. The Bronx was dying. Brooklyn was dying. New Haven was dying, and New Haven was doubly traumatized by the legacy of urban renewal and what it had done to the physical fabric of the city as well as the economic fabric. So, and then Ronald Reagan got elected president in 1980, and a whole different approach to a government, which was working in partnership with the private sector. And this is what the Toledo administration was about. I became development administrator. It was all about public-private partnership with the kinds of local civic institutions, local business institutions that I mentioned, partnership with real estate developers. The real estate developers were the urban superheroes.
Joel Schiavone remaking College Street area.
Right.
McCormick Barron coming in and doing the nice square.
The Fusco Corporation.
You were selling parking garages, remember?
Right. Well, we didn't sell one. Joel, I think, never forgave me for not selling the Crown Street garage, but that's another story. But so public-private partnership was the and Ben DeLito, who I admired so much and still admire so much, believed in his heart, I think, that that the real estate, that rebuilding the city physically would lead to social transformation. This is what we believed, and then I went to Washington and I worked for Ron Brown, and Brown's vision was that his vision of the Commerce Department that I worked with him on as Assistant Secretary and as Chief of Staff was that we were heading into the 21st century, which was going to be an era of globalization and global commerce, and that the country that was best positioned to succeed in a globalized era was the United States, because we were the only country that was as diverse, and that the people who would benefit the most in this country as trade with Africa and Asia and Latin America increased in the developing world were Asian Americans, African Americans, and Latin Americans in this country. This was Brown's vision.
Although no one said Latin A back then.
That's true. That these populations would not only benefit from growth, but they would actually be the drivers of growth because of the trade we would be doing around the world. And you build a globally competitive economy to work in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So these were the articles of faith that physical redevelopment and globalization were going to drive not only prosperity, but, to use the term of today, growth that was inclusive, creating inclusive benefits. And I look back now. We're a quarter of the way through the 21st century, and what has been the legacy? And America has turned, regardless of who wins this upcoming presidential election, that's a subject unto itself. But America has turned inward. Countries all over have turned inward. It's America first. It's not about globalization. There's been a huge pushback on globalization. And you look around New Haven today, and I ask myself, for all the ways in which this community has changed, physically changed, economically changed, so much for the better, so much progress, how much has it created a social transformation? I mean, the poverty rate in New Haven in 2020, for all the progress we've made, was actually a little higher than the poverty rate in 1980 when this community hit bottom. So what does that say? So these are the questions. I don't have answers, Paul. These are the questions as I look back.
Can I press you on some of those questions?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so when you're talking about public, you rely more on the private sector and looking at profit as driving change. Half of what you were hoping to accomplish in New Haven and the Commerce Department happened in a huge way.
Absolutely.
New Haven had a boom beyond our wildest dreams in the 80s. We used to have to throw tons of public money to get one person over 10 years to build a couple of apartment buildings. We now can't keep up with every week the new ones that are building market rate. The New Haven has been rebuilt the way it was physically envisioned. Our College Street areas has ups and downs, but that was abandoned and burned out. Nationally, right now, if you read the recent Economist, where they were talking about all the measures you measure economies, U.S. is the envy of the world. We have the strongest economy in the world. We focus on things we're worried about, but that succeeded too. So what I think I'm hearing from you is that half of the vision came true. If the profit motive and making government into more of there was always some public-private, but making more, having private and profit motive dictate how you craft policy, that it did succeed in building the economy. It did succeed, but that what you didn't see happen was trickled down. That the benefits didn't trickle down to benefit people that always said we're building them up to benefit.
Yeah,
So does that throw out the idea that government should have handed over more of a public-private partnership with profit being a main motive for how policy is crafted?
I would say no, because the starting point for this long history was the government approach had failed. Right, the 1950s and 60s and into the 70s, the heavy hand of government had failed. So the starting point was not that Ronald Reagan changed a successful public approach to this. It was that at the federal level, and here New Haven has always cited properly so as a perfect example, the public approach had failed. That was the idea. That was the starting point. So.
Then we thought of government as a spur to work on infrastructure and conditions that enable you to make money, but also kind of gave them the store sometimes. I totally agree with you. Whether you're looking locally or nationally or globally, America in the world economy, we are so much more
we've made so much progress. It's so much more prosperous, and the city is so much stronger in so many ways, not just physically, but economically too. Again, this biotech, biopharma sector that can drive growth here. I think the question is, how do we is bringing the business actors, bringing the economic actors, and bringing the social actors together in a way that where there's the kind of commitment that existed when I came here in the 80s in the business institutions to making the community a better place. We have to recreate that, and we have to and the challenge, it's very different now because, as I said before, the companies are not
leave.
local companies,
And they leave.
these biotech companies, biopharma companies are selling all over the world. Their customer base is not local, so it's going to take a different kind of private sector leadership and a different kind of public-private partnership to see progress on the social side.
On the poverty question, so some have argued, like Nicholas Lemon, that cities will always have poverty because they become the entry point for opportunity. When he wrote the book The Promised Land, it was a cry to get rid of that poverty, but within months of that book being published, he wrote an article in the Times Magazine that made the opposite argument. He said, in fact, we need areas of opportunity for newcomers and people striving, and we just have to make it a more humane, inclusive place, and he used the word inclusive, so that they can succeed and move up and out. That's a large question, but if you look at one factor in New Haven, we embraced immigration. I would argue that immigration strengthened our city and our economy. Fairhaven is a much better neighborhood than it was in the 90s because of the immigration. But those are people coming here often with no money in their pocket. It means there's poverty, just like when Italian-American, Irish-American, Jewish immigrants came, and then African-American and Latino. So is it an accurate measure to look at the poverty rate not budging to say, therefore, it didn't work?
No, and I agree with you, and I'm not.
It's complicated. That was not a rhetorical question.
No, it is. I think that is the role of cities. I think it is the role of this city. I joked when I first came to New Haven that I used to think that everybody I knew's family started out on the Lower East Side in Manhattan. Then I came to the view that everybody I knew's family started out in the Hill in New Haven. I do think that's the role of the city, but what that means is that whether you're in the business sector or the social sector or the government sector, we need to focus resources and time and attention. We need to commit to helping people move. And the movement is quicker. It's not measured in generations anymore. It's measured in years. That's what the New Haven Promise investment is all about. I mean, it's not called New Haven Promise, by accident. It's the promise of the future that so many of those families of these young people who are getting Promise scholarships coming out of New Haven public schools are the first generation to go to college in their families. So that's exactly the kind of program that is designed to benefit to address the issue that you just raised. And we need, but to my earlier point, you see philanthropic investment in Promise, you see Yale's investment in Promise, you see public investment in Promise, but you don't see business investment in Promise.
And the biggest business in town is Yale. Nothing comes close. Hire the most people, have the most money.
Right.
So the stuff you mentioned, like Promise, happened when Rick Levin was the president. And that's when New Haven had a charge from its corporation to the leaders with people who are empowered to make decisions, like Vice President Bruce Alexander, to roll your sleeves up, get in the community, have a real relationship with the mayor, be part of trying to invest in and figure out problems. That period's gone. Not that there are any bad people involved. It's just that that's gone. The focus has totally changed to the national arms race in terms of raising endowment funds. There is not the same relationship between City Hall and, we have these chump change center for the city that we know aren't going to really change anything in the city. How do we get that back? How do we get Yale to become, it's always going to be somewhat of a tense relationship, but how do we get back to them seeing the city as important enough to make a priority at the highest levels and really be part of true figuring out change in partnership groups like Community Foundation and grassroots groups and throwing real money at it?
Well, first, I would push back a little bit on your characterization. I think I've been on the board of Promise since the beginning. Yale has stayed the course on Promise and has increased their investment in Promise.
I'm not saying they do nothing. There's been no real new initiative, and there's not that day-to-day trying to figure it out. When you go to a Hill meeting, you don't see the vice president of Yale there anymore. when you do see a vice president, they do not have the authority to direct resources. They're not helping develop policies. In fact, they're not doing exactly what this claim this new center is going to do, but which they were informally doing with the homeowner program, the rescuing from the FDIC, the College Street area. So you think I'm wrong about that?
No, I don't think you're wrong about that.
Institutions have different focuses that come from the top.
I think, and I think that in the 11 years of Peter Salovey's leadership, it was mostly about sustaining and growing Yale's commitment to existing programs. I think that from my perspective, and in the Elliker years, Justin's focus has been Yale money for the general fund of the city of New Haven, and he got a substantial new additional Yale commitment
for 5 years, and then it runs out. Well, what Yale got was for perpetuity.
Right, but my point is, look, the city of New Haven has a budget problem, and it needs Yale money for the budget. But that's not transformative for New Haven either. That approach from the city side is not transformative for New Haven either. I think that what can drive transformation, what has driven transformation, and what can continue to drive transformation is Yale science, Yale research, Yale technology, whether it's medical and biomedical or whether it's this quantum computing stuff. That
was interesting. I don't really understand quantum computers except that it's another level of how fast computers work and how quickly tech change.
And Yale has these world-class strengths there.
So you're saying the fact that they're investing so heavily in quantum computing is going to help New Haven?
Well, what I'm saying is it could help New Haven if the whole community, public leadership, social sector leadership, Yale leadership, private sector leadership, sees that potential, and not only the potential for quantum computing research at Yale, but for how it's going to benefit this community.
This is beautiful because it comes back to your point about inclusive growth.
Right.
So last time we wanted to grow New Haven in a way that it grew, but it wasn't inclusive. Now, I was at that press conference. It's really kind of interesting about quantum computing. There is a conservative argument here that I think is worth reckoning with. When they say if you believe you have to build up an economy, you have to leave it free to focus on what best does that. If it's a for-profit sector, what's going to really make the money in the market so sustainable? If it's quantum research, really Yale should just be focused on its expertise on doing great world-changing quantum research. It's got some competition in that area. And that therefore it's then up to the city to figure out how to benefit from it. And that if you put too many... It's like affordable housing.
I totally reject that argument. I mean,
because what can Yale's expertise be there? I'm just throwing the conservative argument out, like housing. When you say we want inclusionary housing, you're forcing them, when they build market rate housing, to set aside a certain number of apartments that are affordable. I talked to a developer who did several projects downtown. He said, I would not have been able to afford to build my project that's in place. So then none of the housing gets built.
Yeah, but that analogy doesn't work because the economics of a housing project are within the four walls or the four streets of that housing project, and it has to work. And if you're going to have below market rate units, you got to have revenue to subsidize that. That is not true with Yale University. Yale has the resources to bring the best minds together, and many of them are here already, to bring the best minds together to not only do quantum computing research, but to work with government and work with other private sector institutions in the community, for-profit and non-profit, to figure out how to make those benefit the community as much as possible.
I mean, in 11 years.
No one necessarily has the answer to that. But, how are we educating our kids relates to that, right? Are we educating our children in this community to have a place in the economy of the future, in the New Haven economy of the future? I mean, those are the kinds of questions. You figure out how to do that and figure out how to raise the resources to make that happen. It's not easy. But to say that shouldn't be part of the role that an institution like Yale University plays in the community, I think is to
I do actually, 100% agree with you. I was just giving the devil's advocate question. So given that they hired a new president from Long Island who doesn't really know the city or know anybody here and didn't live here except for some graduate work, that's really different from when they hired Rick Levin, who had been here for decades and was really involved with the city. Does that make you optimistic or pessimistic?
I don't know Mari McInnes. I wish her the best. I think she's in arguably the critical chair around all these issues we're talking about. I don't draw any particular conclusions from the fact that she's not here. I came here 40 years ago. I'm not analogizing being development administrator, being president of Yale, but I came here 40 years ago knowing nothing about New
became
Haven.
the head of community foundation. It was just like being president of Yale for New Haven's purposes.
Well, when I came back to the foundation, I knew New Haven, but when I came here the first time, I didn't know New Haven at all. I did. So, I have to believe that the people who made the people who run the university at the board level, the Yale Corporation, and the people who make decisions about who's going to be president have these local issues on the agenda, and everything I've seen in at least the last 35 years in New Haven, since Benno Schmidt made a $50 million commitment
and started a $50,000 center for the city that funded a summer program.
Yes, we can go over the history, but everything I've seen in the last generation says that Yale passed through that portal, realized in the late '80s and early '90s that New Haven had to be on the agenda. It has been on the agenda. New Haven has benefited enormously from that, and there has to be a new agenda for Yale and New Haven in the 2020s, and I have high hopes that Mari McGinnis will figure out, working with others in the community, what that should be.
We're talking to Will Ginsberg, finishing up a 24-year run as CEO of the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven. Do you ever feel like Joe Biden? Joe Biden was this white leader, long service, who really paved the way for talented African Americans to have leadership position. He was brought on as the more seasoned person to run with Barack Obama and really helped him do that. Then when he was president, he reluctantly took a little kicking and screaming, unlike you, then when time was up. But I'm not saying your time was up, but that he then made way for Kamala Harris, and I think was actually very sincere.
Mm-hmm.
And that Harris is now walking this tightrope when she runs for president of saying, nuanced message, but I think it's accurate, is that, like, I like the stuff we did, and I'm really looking forward to putting my stamp and bringing it in new directions. Is that similar to what Karen Du Bois-Walton is stepping into?
Well, I don't think of it that way. Here's the way I do think of it, which is, and I don't necessarily think of myself in the same way as I think of Joe Biden, but here's how I do think of it, which is, we talk about equity, we talk about racial equity. The Community Foundation strategic plan is called Opportunity and Equity. It's about our vision is a more equitable, a community of greater opportunity and greater equity in the future. I've come to the view, maybe reluctantly, over the years, that we can do a lot programmatically and in other ways to build a more equitable community. But in the end, what we need to build a more equitable society, nationally, globally, and here in our community, what we need is a more diverse leadership. Because change is bottoms up, but a lot of change happens top down. And when the leaders of our society and when the leaders of the institutions in our society, when leadership is more diverse, that is when we will see a more equitable society.
And as I said, the board and your staff got much more diverse, majority BIPOC board since you were there. Is this the first person of color to lead the foundation and the first woman?
No and no. The foundation in the early 90s hired a man named Alan Green, who came from the Hartford Foundation.
Oh, I remember him. He was here like for 3 minutes.
He was here for a couple of years, and his successor was a woman named Nancy Hadley. So, in the 90s, the foundation had an African American man and then a white woman running the foundation. Both had short tenures. I wasn't here. I can't make any judgments about why they were not more successful. But on the factual question, no, it's not the first person of color and not the first woman.
How are you feeling about the quest of Kamala Harris to become the first black female to be president, and just in general to win? Do you feel it's going to impact this election is going to impact the work you've been building on at the Community Foundation?
I absolutely do. I mean, I think the stakes at every level for this country and for all of us in this election are huge. But and I won't go to there are a million things I could talk about from a policy perspective there. But I think from my perspective, running a community institution and my personal view of the world being through a community lens, I think that Kamala Harris, the message has been about bringing people together, and Donald Trump, like him or not, I don't, but he is a divider, and his message has always been about dividing people, and I think that in that sense, that the notion that we are a community as a country or at the local level is on the ballot in this election, and that's one of the things I find most terrifying about the choice that America is going to make week after next.
Yeah, so the new obsession is, remember in 2016, there was that needle the New York Times had of a conglomeration of all polls of who was going to win the election. They updated it by the minute. And up until election night, when the polls closed, it had 99% chance that Hillary Clinton was going to win. Within 1 hour of the Eastern polls closing, 45 minutes, that needle kept going down to 37%. And people obsessively for weeks, people like me and I know, were every day checking that needle to try to have some kind of confidence. I think the new place for that obsession is the Times on its homepage has a set of all the swing states and what the collection of who's leading. And it's so unproductive when we have this fear about this election and what's going to happen, because all the numbers except for Texas, which is a 6-point margin, I don't know why it's even on that list.
Minnesota, too.
Oh, Minnesota, right. All the other ones, they're within 1 or 2 points. So that's really doesn't mean anything, except people like me who say that except for 2022, it undercounts the Trump lead. But every day, like I noticed one day yesterday, it said Trump was ahead by less than 1% in Michigan. You say, oh no. The next day it said Harris by more than 1%. Yeah.
Right.
So basically we're going to fret, which doesn't not very helpful.
We sure do. And the polls, who knows? I mean, that same chart you're referring to, which I look at about 10 times a day.
Me too.
Maybe 20 times a day.
And I think they don't even update it.
And it doesn't tell me anything.
It's not going to tell us anything useful.
But that chart also says that if these polls miss in the same way they missed in 2020, then Trump carries all those states. And if they miss in the same way they missed in 22, Harris carries all those states. So that's further reason why we can't draw any conclusions from that data either. I will say, so the country is split down the middle. And one thing I always push back on is when people say, our system doesn't work anymore. Our system, I don't agree with that. I think our system can work. It's just that a democracy doesn't work well when there's no mandate, when it's 50-50. Because
with modern techniques of politics, it's hard to have elections that have big margins. I know there are some like Reagan Dukakis and McGovern Nixon, but in general, there's such a science of politics now of how to craft what positions you take and what buttons to press to.
Yeah, but even if you go back to Obama, he did
have a mandate. But did you see the group that's doing the ads for Harris that they preview 20 ads for when they pick? And they look at focus groups that go down to less than a percentage point of reactions to decide which one to go. That's a science.
It's a science. Whether it's a valid science, it's a different question.
We're going to find out.
But even as recently as Barack Obama, I mean, go back to 2008, which I do in my mind a lot. Here was a freshman senator, African-American, half-black freshman senator from Illinois running against an American icon.
Who liberals liked.
And it wasn't a close election at all. And one of the reasons I go back to one of my favorite memories, and I've spent a lot of my life dealing with politics in one way or another and government in one way or another, was Wilbercross High School election day morning, 2008. Waiting in line for 45 minutes in the parking lot at Wilbercross High School. People were so excited, so
to cast that ballot.
So enthusiastic. It was just a great,
it was beautiful,
great moment. Yeah, and I'm not going to vote early because I look forward to standing in line in the parking lot of Wilbercross High School.
Well, Ginsberg, we focused on the thing that's making us all neurotic these days, but in fact, it's happening at the same time as you have a joyful transition in your life. After a job well done running the administration, the foundation, what is your next plan in life?
Well, it's funny you ask that. People say, "What's your retirement plan?" And my response is, I think retirement and plan are antithetical to
as
one
everybody
another.
finds out.
But I have lots of ideas, lots of interests, lots of ideas that I want to explore. And when I started thinking about what I'm going to do in retirement, I took out a blank piece of paper and I said, I'm going to make a list of the things I love to do. And it's a pretty long list. Things I like to read, things I like to explore, things I want to write. It starts with family and, as I mentioned before, children and grandchildren, and of course my wife and friends. So many of our friends are here. So I don't worry that I'm gonna. Sure, there'll be mornings when I wake up and say, what am I going to do today? But life's going to be full, and I'm excited about it.
Well, I think I can speak for many people to say it's been such a pleasure dealing with you in the civic arena for 40 years, including times when I would cover you and there were some difficult stories. I've always found you to be a smart, funny, and compassionate and kind person who works so closely with our community every day to make New Haven better than the way we found it.
And we're staying. I should say one other thing, which is we're staying in New Haven, and I'll find other ways to channel my love for this community. So, but Paul, I throw it right back at you. We've been friends for close to 40 years, and I've admired your work. You've contributed so much to this community. You're one of the people who has made New Haven what it is, and I'm grateful to you, and I treasure our long friendship.
Same here. Thank you, Will.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks for coming here. Thanks for Harry Drost. I just want everyone to know that historically the polls undercount Trump voters for working the controls with such aplomb at this radio station. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day, all night, and all week long at WNHH New Haven's home for community radio.